Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good afternoon. In the last half hour, the Prime Minister's delivered a statement of intent over Brexit, saying that she's determined to deliver a deal by this Sunday.
Well, European Commission and British negotiators have also today agreed a draft document on future EU-UK ties after Brexit. Here's what Theresa May said about 20 minutes ago.
I have had one goal in mind: to honour the vote of the British people and deliver a good Brexit deal. Last week, we achieved a decisive breakthrough when we agreed with the European Commission the terms for our smooth and orderly exit from the EU. Alongside that withdrawal agreement, we published an outline political declaration setting out the framework for our future relationship. Last night in Brussels, I had a good, detailed discussion with President Juncker, in which I set out what was needed in that political declaration to deliver for the United Kingdom. We tasked our negotiating teams to continue working overnight, and as a result, the text of that declaration has been agreed between the European Union and the United Kingdom. I've just updated the Cabinet on progress, and I'll be making a statement to the House of Commons later this afternoon. This is the right deal for the UK. It delivers on the vote of the referendum. It brings back control of our borders, our money and our laws. And it does so while protecting jobs, protecting our security and protecting the integrity of the United Kingdom. The agreement we've reached is between the UK and the European Commission. It is now up to the 27 leaders of the other EU member states to examine this agreement in the days leading up to the special EU Council meeting on Sunday. I will be speaking to my counterparts over that time, including meeting Chancellor Kurz of Austria here in Downing Street later today. Last night I spoke to the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, and I'm confident that on Sunday we'll be able to agree a deal that delivers for the whole UK family, including Gibraltar. On Saturday I will return to Brussels for further meeting with President Juncker, where we will discuss how to bring this process to a conclusion in the interests of all our people. The British people want this to be settled. They want a good deal that sets us on course for a brighter future. That deal is within our grasp, and I am determined to deliver it.
Determined to deliver. Well, let's turn to our political editor, Faisal Islam, who is in Westminster. Faisal, the Prime Minister didn't actually skip to the lectern, as she might say if she was wandering through a field of wheat, but there is a sense in which she has the wind at her back.
You could say that, on certainly compared to last week after that marathon 5-hour difficult cabinet meeting. It's a different type of thing, but that's also the nature of this document. Let's make this really clear. The 585-page technical document was about withdrawal last week, problematic enough. This is an expansion of the 6 pages on the future. It's now at 26 pages, and it is, really importantly, a political declaration. So it isn't legally binding. It provides the parameters for a negotiation which, if the Prime Minister gets her deal through, begins in March and could take years. But these are the parameters, and it should, the Prime Minister hopes, provide some comfort, not just to some of the sceptical MPs in the Commons, but also to some of the industry voices that want to maintain similar trading conditions. Let's have a look at some of the detail. This would be, I think, for the Prime Minister and number 10, considered to be a win. Paragraph 19, the parties recall their determination to replace the backstop solution on Northern Ireland by a subsequent agreement. Northern Ireland by a subsequent agreement that establishes alternative arrangements for ensuring the absence of a hard border on the island of Ireland on a permanent footing. Now, this wasn't in the draft that we saw last week, and it just provides the Prime Minister with something to offer the sceptical members of her cabinet and MPs and perhaps the DUP. Look, they are considering very seriously this issue of alternatives to the backstop that you don't like, these technological solutions. Remember, those Tory MPs went in to suggest just this into Downing Street only this week. OK, so that would be a win. I'm not sure it's going to convince everybody. Here is something that Dominic Raab found particularly offensive and cited. It's the idea that the backstop forms the basis of the future relationship. And it's this particular phrase that the economic partnerships, that's kind of basically the future trade deal, will build and improve on the single customs territory provided for in the withdrawal agreement. Single customs territory is code for a form of customs union. And so if that provides the basis, people were wondering, well, where does that go? This is not going to be a Canada-style deal. The difference here is literally just two words, and improve. Not sure that's going to be enough for the likes of Dominic Raab and others, but it is a difference of sorts. Let's move on to mobility, which is how in these legalistic documents they describe migration. Important for the PM, principle of free movement of persons between the European Union and the United Kingdom will no longer apply, as she has constantly said. But look at paragraph 52, visa-free travel for short-term visits, but that seems to be quite narrowly defined there. There are still a bunch of other things to have to decide about migration policy. Actually, number 51 there, non-discrimination between the Union's member states and full reciprocity. That means that the UK has to treat Bulgaria the same as Belgium or France. Some may have an issue with that as a type of restriction, but it is a reality of doing business with the EU. Fishing, that massive issue, particularly for Scottish MPs. It was the cause of late debate into the night. This is the phrase that has particularly annoyed some Scottish MPs. Within the context of the overall economic partnership, the parties should establish a new fisheries agreement on, inter alia, access to waters and quota shares. Now, certainly some Scottish MPs, and one of them, Ross Thompson, has tweeted about this already, sovereignty over waters sacrificed for a trade deal. He's seeing this as a linkage between fishing access rights, quota shares, and the overall trade deal. DEFRA, the department concerned, Michael Gove's department, have put out a rebuttal saying that all their red lines are adhered to. There will continue to be an argument about that. The SNP suggesting already that Scottish MPs should be resigning over this issue, but DEFRA saying that that's fine. But that's fishing. We'll continue the argument over that, no doubt. Then just lastly, another big issue for Brexiters is the issue of the European Court of Justice. Prime Minister said that she'd end the jurisdiction. In the case of the joint committee that oversees this future arrangement, what has been agreed is that where there are issues of EU law, and we are still abiding by some elements of that, that the arbitration panel should refer the question to the CJEU, that's the European Court of Justice, as the sole arbiter of union law for a binding ruling. So there will be some instances, theoretical, I think Downing Street would argue, where the European Court of Justice would have some say over what goes on in the UK. Plenty more in this report. Will it change the game for the Prime Minister? She hopes so. If the Brexiters want to, there are some ladders to climb down here, but I don't think their substantive concerns are fully dealt with by the changes we have seen, but we shall see.
OK, Faisal, thanks.
Well, let's cross live now to Brussels, and our correspondent there, Mark Stone. Mark, Theresa May had a little bit of a skip in her step as she came out of number 10. Is that positivity being mirrored in Brussels?
It certainly is. From the European Commission point of view, they are as relieved as she was. It was very evident, I thought, when she walked out onto the steps of number 10. She did seem buoyed, and certainly that is reflected here, I think, because, you know, their negotiators on both sides have been working very, very hard indeed for this. There was always the expectation that it would be picked apart, that the first draft would be picked apart, as it was, and they have then gone back to the negotiating table as late as last night. And it's our understanding that through the night, negotiators from both sides were working on the document that Faisal has just outlined there. And since then, we know that the document has been handed from the Commission to the European Council, whose president is Donald Tusk. And he has tweeted within the past couple of hours explaining the process now, effectively. He tweeted, I think we've got it here somewhere, that the deal has effectively been done and that he is now sending this document out to the European Union capitals for them to have a look at. I think it is pretty clear that almost all the European capitals will be happy with this document. Clearly there is some problem Spain has an issue with Gibraltar. France did have an issue with fishing rights. We don't know whether they are still issues. In fact, we do know that the Spanish issue is still an issue. The French one, it's less clear at the moment. Spain, as of last night, was continuing to insist that it would, as it says, using the language of the Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez, it would veto Sunday's agreement. Well, I can tell you they can't do that because they haven't got the ability to, because Sunday's agreement, the rubber stamping process, does not have to be agreed by every single member state. It is a qualified majority ruling or verdict, and so Spain can throw its toys out of the pram if it wants to, and make a political point, as it probably is, because it's got elections in the part of Spain that neighbours Gibraltar at the beginning of December. That's perhaps why they're making a noise. But it won't have an impact on Sunday's vote. Where it will have an impact, and this is, I think, why people are a little bit concerned about it, is down the line. Because if Spain isn't happy with elements of this and wants stuff about Gibraltar in this, which currently is not in this document, then down the line in 2, 3, 4 years, when the trade deal is signed, if it ever is, then whichever Spanish government is in power could veto that, because every government in the EU has to agree to that. So potential problems down the line. But I think broadly what this has to do is two things. If you're in the EU and you're reading it, you need to look at it and think, yep, it's better to be a member of the EU than not. If you're in the UK, especially if you're a Brexiteer and reading it, you need to look at it and think, yeah, this is the blueprint for why it's better not to be in the EU. Both of those things can't be true. Which one is true will become a reality down the line when the trade deal is finally done.
Mark, thank you.
The Cabinet on this progress this morning. Mr. Speaker, the draft text that we have agreed with...
You're watching Sky News. It's 3 o'clock and the Prime Minister is now talking to members of Parliament in the House of Commons after the European Council said the future relationship between the UK and the EU has been agreed in principle. Let's listen in.
Our borders, our laws and our money, while protecting the United Kingdom. It ends free movement once and for all. Instead, we will introduce a new skills-based immigration system based not on the country people come from, but on what they can contribute to the UK. It ends the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK. Yes, it does. We will make our own laws in our own parliaments here in Westminster and in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and they will be adjudicated on by UK courts. And it means an end to sending vast sums of money to the EU, so we can take full control of our money to spend on priorities, including our long-term plan for the NHS, to which we've committed to spending over £394 million more per week by 2023-24. And just this morning, I was able to announce a major new investment in primary and community care worth £3.5 billion a year in real terms by 2023-24. Mr. Speaker, the text we have now agreed would create a new free trade area with the European Union, with no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions. This will be the first such agreement between the EU and any advanced economy in the world, which will be good for jobs. The EU said that the choice was binary, Norway or Canada. The political declaration recognises that there is a spectrum, with the extent of our commitments taken into account in deciding the level of checks and controls. Crucially, the text we have agreed also has an explicit reference to development of an independent trade policy by the UK beyond this partnership with the EU. So we would have the ability to sign new trade deals with other countries and capitalise on the opportunities in the fastest growing economies around the world. And we will be able to get on with this, negotiating deals during the implementation period and putting them in place immediately afterwards. The deal would mean we leave the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy. Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear about what this would mean for fishing. We would become an independent coastal state with control over our waters, so our fishermen get a fairer share of the fish in our waters. We have firmly rejected a link between access to our waters and access to markets. The fisheries agreement is not something we will be trading off against any other priorities. We are clear that we will negotiate access and quotas on an annual basis, as, for example, do other independent coastal states like Norway and Iceland. The trade agreement with the EU would also cover services and investment that will go further than any other recent EU agreements. And it would secure new arrangements for our financial services sector, ensuring that market access cannot be withdrawn on a whim and providing stability and certainty for our world-leading industry. We would also have a cutting-edge agreement on digital, helping to facilitate e-commerce and reduce unjustified barriers to trade by electronic means. And there would be strong rules in place to keep trade fair and ensure neither side can unfairly subsidise their industries against the other. The text we have agreed with the European Commission also includes a new security partnership, with a close relationship on defence and tackling crime and terrorism to keep all our people safe. There would be a surrender agreement to bring criminals to justice no matter where in Europe they break the law. And there would be arrangements for sharing of data, including on DNA, passenger name records and fingerprints. The new security partnership would also ensure close cooperation between our police forces and other law enforcement bodies. And we would continue to work together on sanctions against those who violate international rules or commit atrocities. And there would be joint working on meeting cybersecurity threats and supporting international efforts to prevent money laundering and the financing of terrorists. Finally, as I set out for the House last week, the draft withdrawal agreement will ensure that we transition to this new and ambitious future relationship in a smooth and orderly way. It will deliver a 20-month implementation period so that we have time to put our new future relationship in place and that businesses have time to prepare for it. It will protect the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU so they can carry on living their lives as before. It will ensure a fair settlement on our financial obligations, less than half what some originally expected. And it will meet our commitment to ensure there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and no customs border in the Irish Sea. Mr. Speaker, the text we have agreed is explicit about the determination of both sides to avoid the backstop altogether by getting the future relationship in place on the 1st of January 2021. And in the unlikely event that we ever did need the backstop, to ensure it is quickly superseded either by the future relationship or alternative arrangements. As part of this, there is an explicit commitment to consider facilitative arrangements and technologies which could avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. And I'm grateful to my right honourable friends, the members for Chingford and Woodford Green and for North Shropshire, for their ideas on this. Preparatory work on alternative arrangements to avoid the backstop would begin before we leave, enabling rapid progress after our withdrawal. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear about the stage we've reached in these negotiations and the scale of what is now at stake. We have an agreed text between the UK and the European Commission. The text is today being shared with the leaders of the other 27 member states ahead of the Special EU Council on Sunday. The negotiations are now at a critical moment, and all our efforts must be focused on working with our European partners to bring this process to a final conclusion in the interests of all our people. Last night, I spoke to Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain. We have been working constructively with the governments of Spain and Gibraltar in the negotiations on the withdrawal agreement, and we want this work to continue in the future relationship. But I was absolutely clear that Gibraltar's British sovereignty will be protected, and that the future relationship we agree must work for the whole UK family. Today I met Chancellor Kurz of Austria, which currently holds the EU's presidency. And later today and tomorrow I will be speaking to other European leaders ahead of returning to Brussels on Saturday. Mr. Speaker, the British people want Brexit to be settled. They want a good deal that sets us on a course for a brighter future. And they want us to come together as a country and to move on, to focus on the big issues at home, like our NHS. The deal that will enable us to do this is now within our grasp. In these crucial 72 hours ahead, I will do everything possible to deliver it for the British people, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the advanced copy of her statement. These 26 pages are a testament to the failure of the Tories' bungled negotiations. 19 extra pages, but nothing has changed. The only certainty contained within these pages is that the transition period will have to be extended, or we will end up with a backstop and no exit. It represents the worst of all worlds. No say over the rules that will continue to apply, and no certainty for the future. There is no change to the withdrawal agreement, no unilateral pull-out mechanism, no concessions on the backstop, which would create a new regulatory border down the Irish Sea. Mr. Speaker, did the EU not receive the amendments and improvements promised by the Leader of the House? A little over a year ago, we were confidently told by the government that by the end of the Article 50 period, we would have a trade deal. The International Trade Secretary said it would be the easiest in human history. Instead, we have 26 pages of waffle. This empty document could have been written 2 years ago. It's peppered with phrases such as the parties will look at, the parties will explore. What on earth has the government been doing for the last 2 years? They've managed less than 1 page a month since the referendum. The Prime Minister said nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. It's clear from this document that indeed nothing is agreed. This is the blindfold Brexit we all feared, a leap in the dark. It falls short of our Labour's 6 tests. This government could have negotiated a new comprehensive customs union, giving certainty to business and securing manufacturing industry and manufacturing industry jobs. Instead, Mr. Speaker, they're more interested with dog whistling on immigration. I hope...
Order. When the Prime Minister delivered her statement, she delivered it to a largely attentive and courteous House. Order. I couldn't care less what somebody largely inaudibly and certainly irrelevantly chunters from a sedentary position. The Prime Minister was heard in courtesy. The Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, will likewise be heard in courtesy. If it requires the process to take a bit longer, so be it. If it requires it to take a lot longer, so be it. If it takes several hours, so be it. So give up, be quiet, behave on both sides, and let's hear people speak. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Prime Minister will abandon the sort of poisonous and divisive rhetoric about EU nationals jumping the queue. European Union nationals have contributed massively to this country across all industry and public services, while it is this government and this Prime Minister as Home Secretary who built a hostile environment for non-EU immigrants. Chequers has been chucked. There is no common rule book and no mention of frictionless trade. Our participation is downgraded in a number of European agencies, or we're out of them in their entirety. After more than 2 years of negotiations, Mr. Speaker, there is no clarity over our status with a range of European-wide agencies. The Erasmus scheme, the Galileo project, Euratom, the European Medicines Agency, the European Chemicals Agency and the European Aviation Safety Industry. Or on none of these do we know our final status. Take, for example, section 107 of the document. It says, and I wish to quote from it, the parties should consider appropriate arrangements for cooperation on space. Well, what a remarkable negotiating achievement that is. After 2 years, they're going to consider appropriate arrangements. Mr. Speaker, this is waffle. the blindfold Brexit of a government that spent more time arguing with itself than negotiating for Britain. On fisheries, the Prime Minister and the Environment Secretary have been saying that Britain will leave the common fisheries policy and become an independent coastal nation. Yet, this agreement sets an aspiration to establish a new fisheries agreement on access to waters and quota shares by summer 2020. That sounds to me like we're replacing membership of the common fisheries policy with a new common fisheries policy. It's clear, absolutely clear, that during what will now inevitably be an extended transition period, there will be no control of our money, our laws and our borders, or indeed of fishing stocks for a very long time to come. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and said a deal had been agreed between the UK and the European Commission, and it was now up to the EU 27. Until this Parliament has debated and voted, there is no UK agreement. This half-baked deal is a product of 2 years of botched negotiations in which the Prime Minister's red lines have been torn up, cabinet resignations have been racked up and Chequers has been chucked. This is a vague menu of options, not a plan for the future and not capable of bringing our country together.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I have to say to him that on virtually everything he said in his response to my statement, he couldn't be more wrong. Indeed, I didn't believe that he'd actually even read the political declaration that we've published today, like the withdrawal agreement. He did quote, I know, one sentence from it, I think in an attempt to suggest that he'd actually read the document, where he said there was, which was an example, he said, of lack of detail. Well, perhaps if he'd read some of the other aspects of this document, he would know there is significant detail in this document. No tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions across all goods sectors. No other major economy has this. Liberalisation in trade in services, well beyond the parties' WTO commitments, building on recent union FTAs. An equivalence decision on financial services, a comprehensive air transport agreement, reciprocal arrangements for timely, effective and efficient exchange of passenger name records and of DNA, fingerprints and vehicle registration data, enabling the UK to participate on a case-by-case basis in common security and defence policy, missions and operations. There's plenty more. I could go on, but I think the Right Honourable Gentleman is beginning to get the message about this. Now, he also talked about where he thought that somehow we hadn't achieved any changes. Well, let me be clear on some of those changes. I referred to at least one of them in my statement. The EU said that the choice was binary, Norway or Canada. The political declaration concedes that there is a spectrum, the extent of our commitments taken into account in deciding the levels of checks and controls. The EU said we couldn't share security capabilities as a non-member state outside of free movement and outside of the Schengen area. The political declaration grants us direct access to some and enables us and promises to enable many others. Further commitments than they have made to any non-member state. They said we couldn't preserve the invisible customs border between Northern Ireland and Ireland without splitting our customs territory. The withdrawal agreement maintains the integrity of the UK's customs territory. Again, I could go through some further points. And he talks about the common fisheries policy. Now, this is where I began to think that maybe the Right Honourable Gentleman had read the document but not understood the document or what lies behind it. If we are going to ensure that we are able to continue to have access to the waters of other European member states and European Union member states as we do at the moment, we will need to negotiate, as other non-EU member states do, an annual agreement on access to waters between the UK and the European Union. The point at the moment is that we're not able to do that as an independent coastal state, and in the future we will be able to do that as an independent coastal state. And I also have to say to the right honourable gentleman, what I have been doing throughout this is looking at what the best interests are of the United Kingdom. So let's just go through his other challenge to this, which was the 6 Labour tests on Brexit. Does it ensure a strong and collaborative future relationship with the EU? No. Yes. Does it ensure the fair management of migration in the interests of the economy and communities? Yes. Does it defend rights and protections and prevent a race to the bottom? Yes. Does it protect national security and our capacity to tackle cross-border? Yes, it does. And does it deliver? Does it deliver?
Mr. Mahmood, we don't need you gesticulating. You're not a football referee or a linesperson. Calm yourself, man. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And does it ensure that it delivers a deal that is good for every part of the UK? Yes, it does. And can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, this is a good deal for the United Kingdom. It delivers on the vote of the British people. It brings back control of our borders, our money and our laws. It protects jobs, it protects security, it protects the integrity of the United Kingdom. He may want to play party politics. I'm working in the national interest.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that I, of course, appreciate enormously the huge endeavours she has made to deal with what has now emerged as a particularly toxic issue, that of the Northern Irish backstop, now bound into the withdrawal agreement. I do say to my right honourable friend, for all of that effort and work, the reality is that this is not the withdrawal agreement. And the withdrawal agreement will make it very clear that should we, even under these terms, struggle with a negotiation for a free trade arrangement and not complete that process, we will fall into the Northern Ireland backstop as it exists at the moment. And that will mean simply that we will be bound by those restrictions that force Northern Ireland into a separate arrangement and us into the customs union. And I simply say to my right honourable friend, therefore, I would hope that she would now consider that none of this is at all workable unless we get the withdrawal agreement now amended so that any arrangements we make strip out that backstop and leave us with that positive open border that we talked about.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, he based the premise of his question was that if the future relationship is not in place by the 1st of January 2021, and if in some sense there needs to be that interim arrangement, then automatically we would go into the backstop. That is not the case. The withdrawal agreement makes clear that there is the alternative of an extension to the implementation period, but it also refers to these alternative arrangements, and as I said in my statement, I'm grateful to him for the proposals that he has put forward in relation to that matter, and we are working on those alternative arrangements. So it is simply not the case that automatically we fall into a backstop, into the backstop that is described in the withdrawal agreement. And secondly, there are many ways, I won't go through the full list, there are many ways in the document where it is clear that that arrangement, whether it is the extension of the IP, an alternative arrangement or a backstop, is there for a temporary period before we're able to put the future relationship into place. What the backstop and those alternative arrangements and the proposals amount to are what I think my right honourable friend was talking about at the end of his question, which is our commitment to the people of Northern Ireland that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that they will be able to carry on their business much as they do today. That, I hope, is what we are all striving to achieve in relation to this matter. There are a number of ways in which we can achieve that, and the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration make clear that there are a number of ways we can achieve that, and we're working on all of those.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement. This government really is spluttering forward in a haphazard, chaotic way. There are, of course, outstanding political concerns still to be addressed by the EU27 this Sunday. Central to this political declaration remains the matter of fishing rights, a matter critical to Scotland. Mr. Speaker, a week ago, Scottish Conservative members in this place wrote to the Prime Minister. They said, at the end of the implementation period, we must be able to negotiate access and quota shares with the EU and other third countries independently. This means that access and quota shares cannot be included in the future economic partnership. The political declaration agreed today, paragraph 75 states, within the context of the overall economic partnership, the parties should establish a new fisheries agreement on inter-ally access to waters and quota shares. Mr. Speaker, there we have it. Scotland's fishing community is once again a bargaining chip used by a Tory government in Brussels. Worse, the detail in the draft withdrawal agreement has pitted fishing against aquaculture, access to water versus access to trade, making plain, once again, that Scottish interests are expendable. Just as was the case when the UK entered the then EEC under the leadership of Ted Heath, when the Conservatives traded away our fishing rights, they have continually done so. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's fishing rights thrown overboard as if they were discarded fish. So much for taking back control, more like trading away Scotland's interests. This is an absolute dereliction of the promises Scottish Conservative members and the Secretary of the State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs have made to Scotland. Shame on them. Will the Prime Minister tell the House if her Scottish MPs and Secretary of State have agreed to this political declaration? Is it not the case that she has just lost further critical votes on the deal because the Scottish Tory MPs could not possibly vote in favour of this sellout of Scottish fishing interests?
Mr. Speaker, I think it would be helpful for the right honourable gentleman if I repeated what I said in the statement. We would become an independent coastal state with control over our waters, so our fishermen get a fairer share of the fish in our waters. We have firmly rejected a link between access to our waters and access to markets. The fisheries agreement is not something we will be trading off against any other priorities. We are clear that we will negotiate access and quotas on an annual basis, as, for example, do other independent coastal states like Norway and Iceland. And can I say, well, the right honourable gentleman may choose to shout at me from a sedentary position, but I have to say to him he devoted all of his response to my statement in...
Order. No, I understand the right honourable gentleman adheres very strongly to his position. It's in the nature of holding an opinion. But he must hear the response from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The right honourable gentleman devoted all of his response to the issue of fishing. He is sitting there chuntering from a sedentary position that this is a sellout of Scottish fishermen. I will tell him what a sellout of Scottish fishermen would be. It's the policy of the Scottish nationalists to stay in the CFP.
And Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend accept this declaration is itself self-contradictory in that it insists on both the sovereignty of both the EU and the United Kingdom legal orders, and also that without control of our own laws and by surrendering to binding rulings of the European Court, this declaration cannot be reconciled with the repeal of the 1972 Act, nor the referendum vote? And will she further note that the European Scrutiny Committee has resolved to hold an inquiry into the government's handling and outcome of these negotiations?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend that that this political declaration asserts the sovereignty of both sides of this agreement, of the United Kingdom and the European Union, because that is exactly what will persist. We will be a sovereign nation. We will no longer be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. There are circumstances where a point that is being looked at, for example, in arbitration, is considered to be a matter of the interpretation of European Union law. There is one body that interprets European Union law, that is the European Court of Justice. And what we make clear is, in those circumstances, the arbitration panel may ask the European Court of Justice for an opinion on the interpretation of European Union law. They will then consider their decision as an arbitration panel in the light of that opinion.
Owen Patterson. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her movement in paragraphs 26 and 27, taking on board our proposals to use modern techniques used elsewhere and modern processes on the Irish border. But there is a big but in this. As long as the backstop is in existence in a legally binding document, there is a danger that should talks fail, the backstop becomes accepted. We have the horror of being in the customs union, the horror of Northern Ireland being split off under a different regime, and as I saw in Washington this week, if we cannot control our tariffs and our regulatory regime, we cannot do free trade deals with other countries. So at this late stage, would she consider withdrawing the backstop from the legally binding draft document and replacing it with the draft trade facilitation chapter and border protocol, which we gave her earlier in the week, and making so that could become the new backstop?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, and as I indicated, I'm grateful to him and my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green, for the work that they have been doing on this issue. What we negotiated in the withdrawal agreement was the specific reference to alternative arrangements that enable us to work up those alternative arrangements such that they would be, what the title suggests, an alternative to the arrangements for the backstop, or would enable us to come out of the backstop if it was the case that the backstop had been started, that we had been started down the route of being in the backstop. I continue to say to my honourable and right honourable friends, and to members of this House more widely, it is the firm determination of this government, and indeed it is the determination of the European Union, that we will work to ensure that we have the future relationship arranged and able to be in place by the 1st of January 2021. It is not the case, and it indeed is not the case, that there is a sense in which the backstop is automatic. The backstop is not automatic. There are alternatives to the backstop. It will be, and the United Kingdom can choose those alternatives. Now, there are pros and cons. There are pros and cons in these. And when the time comes, obviously, that choice will measure those pros and cons. But what matters is that it is the case that it will not be the case that the only way to deal with that interim period is through the backstop. It can be dealt with by alternative arrangements or by an extension to the implementation period.
Gable. Mr. Speaker, this is essentially an agreement to have an agreement, and is full of worryingly vague aspirations. How, for example, can the Prime Minister justify... how can the Prime Minister justify Clause 24, which relates to medicines, chemicals and aviation safety, where we currently have strong, agreed, cooperative standards, and the Prime Minister has managed to negotiate an agreement where we, quote, explore the possibility of cooperation. I mean, that is pathetically weak. And it will cause great anxiety to millions of people who depend on high standards of safety.
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman, that when we leave the European Union, we will cease to be a member of certain agencies that the European Union has at the moment. What we will be doing is ensuring, and you might have noticed that there is a strong reference to close cooperation in the text in relation to EASA. EASA already permits a third country to have that access to the agency. That is not the case with the EMA and the ECA, and that is why, as indeed we identified in the white paper we published in the summer, it will be necessary to work on what those access arrangements to those agencies should be. So EASA already has a model that can be used. The other two agencies do not. But I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think in relation to these negotiations, we are not able to put legal text together until we have left the European Union and are no longer a member of the European Union. And that, of course, is what we will be able to do when we leave on the 29th of March 2019.
Mr. Dominic Raab.
The backstop ties the UK to the customs union and single market rules with no voice and an EU veto over our exit, whilst paragraph 23 of the political declaration makes that the starting point for future relations to build on. The top reason people voted to leave the EU was to take back democratic control over our laws. Isn't it the regrettable but inescapable reality that this deal gives even more away?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, and I think this is the first opportunity I had to be able to thank him for the work that he did as Brexit
Unseemly, very unseemly. Everybody will get a chance to ask a question, but the right honourable gentleman has asked a question. The Prime Minister is answering it, and let's try to show each other some courtesy. The Prime Minister.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that, as I've explained, I think, in response to other of our right honourable and honourable members of this House, the point about the backstop, the point that the backstop is not the automatic route for dealing with a temporary period in relation to any gap that exists between the end of the implementation period in December 2020 and the future relationship coming into place. The political declaration is about that future relationship. There are important points that have been agreed within the withdrawal agreement that will ensure that we can get a good agreement in relation to borders and in relation to our trade area when we join, when we become that independent state outside of the European Union. And my right honourable friend will be aware, as is reflected in this political declaration, there is a spectrum and there is a balance between willingness to abide by rules and the necessity for checks and at the border. And that, of course, is what it is. Continues to be our ambition and our objective to get that frictionless trade at the border, because we believe that's important.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor of the Exchequer said last night that he didn't like the backstop. He doesn't think that the backstop is a good arrangement for our economy, and he doesn't think it is a good arrangement for our union. We agree with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. In light of the political declaration in paragraph 27, to which the Prime Minister referred, it is now clear that the EU are beginning to accept that there are alternative arrangements that can be put in place without the need for the backstop. And I would say to the Prime Minister that if she wants to have the support of my party for the withdrawal agreement, then we need to see an end of the backstop and those alternative arrangements put in place.
Prime Minister.
Thank the gentleman for his comments. Can I say to him, he started off by reflecting the comments that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, have made. As I've said in this chamber, and others have said in this chamber, none of us want to see the backstop being used. The best way to ensure the backstop is not used is to get the future relationship into place. There are all those alternative arrangements, and we will be working on those alternative arrangements, and I'm happy to discuss with the right honourable gentleman and his colleagues what those alternative arrangements could be. But what is important is that we have within the document means in which we can guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland And obviously, from the EU's point of view, they want that guarantee in relation to Ireland, that trade across the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland can continue as it does today. That is the commitment that we've made, no hard border, and that is what we will continue to be committed to providing.
Mr. Damien Green.
Mr. Speaker, outside this House, there's a much higher appreciation of the tenacity of the Prime Minister in pursuing a successful deal than we sometimes hear inside it. One of the principal worries, as we're hearing, has been that in some way we'll be trapped forever, either in the backstop or in a customs union. What is there in this declaration and in the withdrawal agreement to calm those fears?
There are several elements that I would suggest to my right honourable friend would calm those fears. First of all, there are many statements within the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration which explicitly recognise that the backstop, should it be necessary, would only be a temporary arrangement. Indeed, Article 50, which is the legal basis for the withdrawal agreement, cannot establish a permanent relationship. That is reflected in the text, and that is accepted by the European Union. There are also, as I have just explained, the alternative arrangements that can be put in place and the possible extension to the implementation period. But the best route of ensuring that those concerns are calmed is to ensure that we work to get the future relationship, as set out in this political declaration, in place by the 1st of January 2021, so that there is no need for any interim arrangement at all to provide our guarantee and commitment to the people of Northern Ireland.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the withdrawal agreement, this political declaration is not legally binding. And although it may now be 26 pages as opposed to 7, it still does not provide this House with clarity and certainty about our future economic relationship with our biggest, nearest and most important trading partner. Is it really going to take the defeat of her deal to persuade the Prime Minister that she cannot achieve frictionless trade while leaving the customs union and the single market, and that therefore, sooner or later, a different approach is going to have to be found in order to secure the future of our economy and the jobs that depend upon it?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, we have put forward proposals which would enable frictionless trade to be achieved outside of the customs union and outside of the single market. That is not something that is accepted by everyone in the European Union. I fully accept that. But what we have within the future negotiations is the ability to continue to work for our objective of achieving that frictionless trade. But he talks about a concern about uncertainty and into the future. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, the thing that would create most uncertainty in the future is a failure to take and agree a deal which is going to be good for the UK, which delivers on the vote of the people in the referendum and does so while protecting people's jobs and security.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
Speaker, can I regretfully point out to my right honourable friend that, of course, nothing in this political declaration changes the hard reality of the withdrawal agreement that gives the EU a continuing veto over the unilateral power of the entire United Kingdom to do free trade deals or to take back control of our laws. And can I therefore respectfully suggest that it would be better, we can accept the generalities and the self-contradictions contained in this political declaration, but we should junk forthwith the backstop upon which the future economic partnership, according to this political declaration, is to be based, and which makes a complete nonsense of Brexit.
Prime Minister.
I'm sure my right honourable friend will recall the discussions we had earlier in the year when we were agreeing the temporary customs arrangement as our proposal for the basis on which we would ensure that we guaranteed the commitment through the people of Northern Ireland. And indeed, obviously, elements of that have been reflected in what we see in the withdrawal agreement. There are various arrangements that we can put in place, as I have said to others, to other who have questioned me so far in this statement, in relation to the backstop. But can I say to my right honourable friend, the future relationship we have set out in the political declaration ends free movement, ends sending vast sums of money to the European Union every year, and ends the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice here in the United Kingdom. And it enables us to hold an independent trade policy and to negotiate trade deals around the whole of the world. I know that my right honourable friend has expressed his desire in the past to have all of those elements available for the United Kingdom, and that is what this deal delivers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, this is a declaration of aspiration and a charter for years of uncertainty. It is not the comprehensive free trade deal she promised we would have before exit day in her Lancaster House speech. So, having broken that promise, can she now guarantee that that comprehensive free trade deal will be finalised by the end of the transition period? Because so far, this gives no certainty whatsoever to our businesses.
Prime Minister.
Well, on the contrary, I think if the honourable gentleman looks at the comments that have been made by business in relation to the declaration, that were made, in fact, in relation to the outline political declaration last week, like the Federation of Small Businesses, are very clear about the certainty that is provided looking into the future for businesses. And as he will also see when he looks through the political declaration, and indeed in the withdrawal agreement, the firm commitment on both sides to ensure that we work to put into place that legal text. And yes, it is the case that we can't have the legal text on the future agreement until we have left the European Union. And one of the elements within the political declaration, towards the end of the political declaration, as he will have seen, sets out the commitments in relation to working on that for the future. But I think, if I say to the honourable gentleman, what is important is that we have here an outline, a political declaration, which is fuller than the outline we published last week, which sets out very clearly a deal for the UK that is good for the United Kingdom and good for jobs.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't believe this is a good deal for Britain, and I don't think many young people in our country think this is a good deal for Britain at all. Does the Prime Minister accept that if the meaningful vote is lost, and if this House votes also against exiting the EU with no deal, that the only right option then is to go back to the people and allow them to have a final say, including young people, on the direction?
People should not be shouting out. The Right Honourable Lady is asking her Right Honourable Friend the Prime Minister a question. Have the manners to listen. Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think young people would like to be listened to in this debate as well. I was asking the Prime Minister whether, if the meaningful vote is lost, and if this House, as I believe it will, votes against no deal as an exit from the EU, does the government intend to come back with an alternative proposal on how to break the deadlock, and why would that not include going back to the British people to ask them their views?
The Prime Minister.
To my right honourable friend that, of course, we have set out in legislation the procedure that would be followed were the meaningful vote to be lost in this House. But she asks about going back to the people in terms of a second referendum. I will say to my right honourable friend, as I have said now on many occasions here in this House and this Parliament overwhelmingly gave the British people the choice as to whether or not to leave the European Union. The people of Britain voted to leave the European Union. I believe it is important that politicians don't turn round and say, well, what do you think now? Would you like to think again? But we actually say, you voted to leave and we will deliver that Brexit, that leaving of the European Union.
And Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us in her concluding remarks that she wants to move on to focus on the big issues like our National Health Service. But how does she expect to move on when she signed up to a deal which does nothing for our services sector? Our services sector comprises of 80% of our economy, things like retail, banks, leisure and tourism. Can the Prime Minister give our country today a guarantee that our UK service sector will enjoy the same access to the single market that it enjoys today?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable lady that if she looks at the sections that we have on the services sector, she will see that these arrangements that we have in the political declaration go beyond any that have been offered to any other non-member of the European Union.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
I say to my right honourable friend that the number of people who I speak to are fully in admiration of the determination which the Prime Minister has shown over these very difficult negotiations, doing something which no other Prime Minister has ever been tasked with doing. Would she like to explain to the House a little bit more that if this agreement, which is the 585 pages of the withdrawal agreement and today's document which has been agreed with the Commission is rejected, does she think the 6 paragraphs offered by the opposition is the alternative?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend, first of all, for his opening remarks, and secondly, say no. And I think what we see from the opposition is they've set these 6 tests, but actually in no stage have they set out what their plan for an alternative arrangement with the European Union would be.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
When questioned over whether any deal is financially worse than EU membership, the Chancellor said, like last night, it's not only about the economics. I have news for the Prime Minister. We say it's all about the economics. The people can now see that the British government is swivel-eyed in its determination to rip the UK out of the single market and the customs union. Isn't it time to take the deal back to the people and let them decide what matters most?
Minister. Lady, that I've responded when I responded to my right honourable friend, the member for Putney, on the issue of the second referendum. On the question of the economy, this is a deal that protects jobs and protects livelihoods across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the lesson of this long negotiation that when you try to unravel yourself from an international rules-based system because you don't like the rules, unless you want chaos, you start creating a completely new set of rules, many of which are in fact as binding and onerous on this country as any which we had before. And in that context, the backstop, I have to say this to my right honourable friend, is a constitutional anomaly of the first order because it makes the EU the guarantor of a bilateral treaty between ourselves and Ireland of which the people have never been consulted. And I would urge her in those circumstances, if she wants to go ahead with this, to put her deal to the people of this country and to offer to them the alternative of remaining, because the one big eye-opener one sees from all this is that however hard she's tried, at the end of the day, we will be in an international rules-based system, because that, in fact, is where our national interest lies.
My right honourable and learned friend has heard me respond to the issue of asking the people in a second referendum what their views are. But I will also say to my right honourable friend, what we have negotiated here is an arrangement with the European Union which does continue to have a close partnership between the United Kingdom and the EU. I believe that is the right thing for us to do. I believe coming out of the EU will enable us to develop even closer partnerships with other countries around the world through our trade deals and indeed through other support and work we'll be able to do with them on security and defence. But I think it's also important, given our geographical position, given that the EU is our nearest neighbour in terms of trading, that we continue to have that good relationship with the EU, and that's what this delivers.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister now admit that extending the aspirations into a political declaration that's 19 pages longer than the original series of vague aspirations isn't actually a deal?
Yeah.
And when will she actually get to having a deal so that when we vote to leave on the Withdrawal Act, we know where we're leaving to? And will she tell the House whatever happened to frictionless trade, because it's not mentioned at all in her list of aspirations?
I say to the honourable lady that the position, as I've mentioned to others, is that, of course, it is not possible for us to agree the legal text of our future relationship with the European Union until we have left the European Union. And she might like to look, if she looks once again at the text that she will see here, she will see that it very clearly expresses what we have expressed previously in relation to trade, that there is a spectrum, that there is a balance between commitments that are given on rules and the issue of the checks that take place at the border. And it remains our intention as a government to work towards that frictionless trade.
Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fully appreciate that, there are clearly parts of this document which are positive and which I welcome, but my grave worry with it is that it'll never come into effect anyway, because the EU is unlikely to agree a new economic partnership with us because the withdrawal agreement locks us into paying the 38 billion and also commits us to a backstop which has us obeying their rules and applying their customs rules without any say over them.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, this is, and I recognise the concern that she has expressed in relation to the backstop, but actually the reality of the position from the European Union is the complete opposite. There are those in the European Union who actively believe that the backstop would be an advantageous place for the United Kingdom to be. Advantageous because, in their eyes, they see it has that access to the market of the European Union without any payment and without free movement. That is not something that they actively want us to be in. That's why both sides have made clear throughout this document that we don't want the backstop to come into place at all, and were it to come into place, it would only be temporary.
OK, well, that was the Prime Minister speaking in the House of Commons, updating members of Parliament on the progress of the negotiations with the European Union. This came, of course, after the European Council said the future relationship between the UK and the European Union has been agreed in principle. A rather robust exchange seems to be attacked on all sides of the House of Commons there. Let's bring in Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, who's been looking at all the detail. She was attacked on all sides, wasn't she, John?
Yes, but that was partly, I think, because the Speaker has called mostly Brexiteers from the Tory backbenches rather than Remainers. Well, there's not been much support. We've had two loyalists, ex-Cabinet Ministers Damien Green and Patrick McLaughlin, supporting her. Mr Corbyn started off by calling it a blindfold Brexit, a leap in the dark. And then we've had a succession of hardline Brexiteers called by the Speaker. We had, first of all, we had Ian Duncan-Smith, then we had Bill Cash, Owen Paterson, Dominic Raab, who quit just a week or so ago. Then we've, from the Remain, Theresa Villiers we've had as well. From the Remain side, Justine Greening and Dominic Grieve calling for a second referendum. Either there are not many supportive backbenchers leaping up to support the PM, or the Speaker's being a bit mischievous and just calling all her critics. And the most vocal, of course, was Boris Johnson, who talked about junking the backstop, and he said that this deal makes a nonsense of Brexit. And then we had a pretty unfriendly question from Geoffrey Donaldson of the DUP as well. Interestingly, in her statement, the PM praised the help, or so she thought, she'd got from Ian Duncan-Smith and Owen Paterson at a meeting in Downing Street a few days ago. Well, they weren't very grateful because they got up and criticised her, despite all her hard work and her efforts to try and win them over. So we're seeing yet again in the Commons chamber just what a tough task the Prime Minister's got if she's going to sell this deal, get it through the House of Commons. Now, Justine Greening was talking about what might happen if the meaningful vote's lost and there's no deal backed by the House of Commons. That makes the case stronger for a second referendum. That is an argument we're going to hear more and more from the Remainers, but so far the Prime Minister is saying a pretty firm no to that. But we are seeing some tough language from the hardline Brexiteers. Incidentally, Bill Cash, who chairs the European Scrutiny Select Committee, said his committee was going to have an inquiry into how this whole thing had been handled. And so another tough outing for the PM, but as we've seen before, she's resilient, she's defiant, and she is batting away all the criticism. And of course, she's now got to go back to Brussels on Saturday ahead of a summit on Sunday. But I think a lot of European leaders are going to say, well, hold on a minute, your House of Commons is not really supporting you in what you're trying to achieve here. So a tough time in the Commons yet again for the Prime Minister here, and these questions are going to continue for some time yet.
OK, John, for now, many thanks indeed.